Welcome, everybody, to the Beyond the Model Week 10 edition for some NFL DFS picks and GPP strategy lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. I'm your host, Moose, at CFB_Moose on Twitter. That's where you can find me. Co-founder and data guru here at OccupyFantasy.com. Alongside Brian, at BrianJesterFF on Twitter is where you can find him. He's co-founder and CEO of Occupy Fantasy. Brian, how's it going?
What's up, Moose? We were only 2 minutes late starting the stream, which is actually early if you compare it to our NBA streams during the week.
Absolutely, yeah, and yeah, YouTube's been having some technical difficulties, and some of our third parties has been as well. But I think we're back on track. We're ready to go. And Brian, from a high level, last week we said this week. Speaking of week 9, sucks, but wait till you get to week 10, it's even worse. I think that has actually changed a little bit, Brian. As I start to build
Uh,
more, and getting some more of the news, I'm starting to actually really like this slate.
I agree. We are. We're 7 days early talking shit about week 10, and yeah, it turns out. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean there are going to be better NFL games or that there are going to be better NFL players on the field, but I think for DFS, it certainly looks a lot better.
Yeah, and it is a tough slate. I mean, looking at the buys, you have basically four of the top offenses: Kansas City, Miami, Philadelphia, and the Rams, all on bye week. Buffalo is playing on the Monday night game. Uh, yeah, so very limited in those high-powered offenses that we like to talk about, that we like to stack. So you have to get a little bit tricky, Brian.
Definitely. And last week we introduced the title of the new meta stacks, and we certainly have a bunch more this week. And we saw one hit last week, even in the bigger GPP, the millionaires and stuff. We saw the Houston stack just
Mm-hmm.
completely explode. Despite all of us naming a ton of stacks, we did not name the Houston stack last week. And it actually ended up being a little more popular than I expected. I think Stroud was 6 or 7% in most contests, and some of the receivers were obviously over 10%. And I think that is certainly an item to watch out for when you're thinking about what stacks will be popular. They had two guys, Houston being they, had two guys over 10% projected ownership in Tank Dell and Nico Collins. So why not have their quarterback be a popular game stack option? And we saw a lot of pros win last week, so it makes a ton of sense in that regard.
Absolutely, yeah. And for those who weren't there last week, or you're new here or whatnot, these new meta stacks that we're talking about, it's the game's changed, and you can't always just play the most expensive stacks. So how do you get around that? We're playing some of these cheaper, not as high powered offenses. These really cheap stacks that allows you to fit in a nice core, nice stud players that'll get you those extra points. And the best thing about that is these meta stacks don't have to put up 50 like Houston did last week. They can put up 20 and still get you there, especially in some of these smaller contests.
Yeah, I mean, last week's Houston game was an anomaly for sure in terms of raw output. But the other upside to this is just thinking about, in general, we saw last year and in years past a pretty big difference between the top scorers at quarterback and maybe the middle of the pack, and that's tightened up a bit this year as offenses haven't been as powerful. So you're not losing as many fantasy points, but you are saving salary and ownership, which is a pretty nice trade-off.
Absolutely, yeah. And so what we do here in this Beyond the Model show is we have the Occupy model on the website, ranks every player on FanDuel and DraftKings. We take it just a little bit step further, say how can you use that? What are some other stacks that we can play? We have the daily plug written by our NFL writer Chris, who talked about the stacks that we officially recommend. But if you want to go a little bit further, you're playing some of those like super high risk contests, you want to get a little bit different in your 100 player leagues, this is the show to watch. So Brian, I'll actually kick it off to you. I think you and I both have the same number one stack, or pretty close to it, but I'll let you start it off.
Yeah, I think for both of us there are two in that top tier. At least for me, there's two in the top tier, and Chris touches on both these teams, or at least two sides of these games in the daily plug. I'll start with I'll let your team. I'll give you that game, so I'll start with the other team, most of the other game. So, Chargers in Detroit is super interesting to me. It is the top of my stack rankings. Has one of the higher totals on the board, but not necessarily all the ownership that some of these other games have. If you look at the receivers in this game, I'm pulling up the Occupy model on my end. You look at, sure, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 16% projected ownership, which isn't in the top 3 or 4 on the slate, which is nice. But then you look at the Chargers side, and Keenan Allen, who's been mega popular every other week, is only 4% projected ownership on DraftKings this week, 7% over on FanDuel. Then obviously they have Quentin Johnston and Jalen Guyton as Curtis Samuel pieces. And then the running backs are cheap as well, or sorry, low owned. David Montgomery's number 2 in our model, and he's coming back from injury. And I think most projections just assume or don't know how to handle this, and they're splitting the work evenly between Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, I think either one is possible. We could see Montgomery go back to his full-time role, and he's super low owned at 2%, and he would be under owned at that point. Or we could see Gibbs continue to smash, and he's under 5%. So I think take a stand there if you want to play one of the Lions running backs as a run back if you stack the Charger side. Either way, it's a super interesting stack, and I think it's expensive, and that's why a lot of people aren't necessarily going to be on it despite the high total. But we have some news that have opened up a lot of cheaper plays on the slate.
Yes, absolutely. And, I love that play that you're talking about there, especially on the Detroit side. I mean, even the Charger side as well. Both sides look good. And we've been talking about it in the NBA Discord as well. Our writers and everyone's been talking. You have to play some chalk. There, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown is 16% for a reason. He's a good play. He's gonna be popular, and sometimes you have to just eat that chalk.
Yeah, and why not? As we say every week, if you want to negate some of that chalk, is stacking around it. We talk about it in all sports, and this is certainly a game where I think individual pieces will be popular in some spots, but the overall game stack won't be that popular. You can still 3-1 it easily. You can 2x1 it if you want to, maybe especially in smaller contests. But you look at the quarterback projected ownership on that game, and we have Jared Goff, 11%, who projects as the popular quarterback. But no one's playing Herbert at 6%. So I think I definitely like the Herbert side as a little bit lower ownership in that game. And it's mostly because of salary.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one question I do actually have about that, and kind of more of a higher level question in general for you, is with Sam Laporta, double-digit projected ownership, we know what he can do. Are you normally staying away from the popular tight ends in stacks, or are you fitting them in, or kind of what's your play there?
Honestly, I just trust the model. If the model has them highly rated, I will include them in stacks. And as you mentioned, a lot of the top offenses are off this week, which means we have some real names at tight end. If you just sort by salary on DraftKings for tight end, you do have Andrews and Kittle, but neither one have really been consistent or the guys we thought them to be. And then you have Laporta, Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz. Like Dalton Schultz is going to project top 3 in a lot of people's projections. And if you look at just our model in general, we have Trey McBride and Dalton Schultz, followed by Evan Ingram and Sam Laporta. So it's not like this is a stud tight end week. So it looks like a lot of the ownership is going to condense on Trey McBride, rightfully so, with Kyler Murray back. But Laporta, we have him just 9% on DraftKings. And I will say most ownership is going to change a lot if the news, which we've been hinting at for the past couple minutes, if the news that we just got materializes, I think ownership will change dramatically on both sides.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's, for the Bengals, which is the next stack that I'm actually going to recommend for the Beyond the Model. Chase is questionable. It seems more like doubtful now. About 40 minutes ago or so, they elevated 2 wide receivers from the practice squad, Shedrick Jackson and Stanley Morgan, which at first I thought they were talking about like Morgan Stanley, the investment banker.
Close,
to make
so
sure
close.
I was right. And so normally they don't do that unless Chase is probably going to be out. So assuming Chase is out, that's like 20% ownership that gets spread out into different spots. I think actually some of that goes to Keenan Allen. He's like basically one of the 4 people in that salary range ish, but also opens up to other people. Oh god, I can never pronounce it. Iavasa, Trent Irwin. If you're Psycho, Drew Sample that we were talking about in one of our group chats. There's a lot of cheap pieces that open up in this case. A lot of 3K receivers. I think one of them is 4,600. Tyler Boyd's 4,600 on DraftKings. What is he on FanDuel? Check.
Probably 5,600 or something in that range. Okay. I mean, because you got to figure Higgins, for those who haven't been following this, Higgins already been ruled out. Chase, while questionable, if he was going to play, they would only need to elevate one receiver from the practice squad. They've done 2, which gives them 5 receivers if Chase is out. So that seems more likely. We haven't gotten any official reports yet, but just reading between the lines, that seems like it's the case. And like you said, we end up with this super cheap stack on both sides, right? Because we have Tyler Boyd and Trenton Irwin as the top two guys, and then Josevich, which is the pronunciation we learned in preseason thanks to his dominant performances. Those three guys are all mega cheap in one of the more popular game stacks. And then on Houston's side, Nico Collins is out and Robert Woods is back. So we got Tank Dell and Noah Brown, and Robert Woods is underpriced. So it's I mean, you can play whoever you want if you play the stack.
Yeah, I mean, when Higgins missed week 5, Trent Irwin played, I think, like 70-80% of the snaps, got double-digit targets. Absolutely great play there for 3K. I imagine he's projected right now for 1% on both sites. I imagine if Chase is out, that shoots up. I could even see that get to double digits.
I was gonna say potentially even higher, probably. So,
yeah.
But normally we talk about cheaper stacks being salary savers, but this is legitimately a salary saving stack that's actually one of the best stacks on the board.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we know what Burrow can do, and their high-powered offense. In a drop of a hat, they can score 40. We've seen weeks where they put up 40 without Chase, barely even being a part of it. So, if you can play a 3K or 4,600 wide receiver in a game where both teams know that they can put up multiple points, I don't see how this isn't one of your number one stacks.
Yeah, I think it has to be. And you look at their pass rate over expectation the past 3 weeks as Burrow's gotten healthier, it's by and far away the number one in the league over the past few weeks or so. But the big question, Moose, is does that change if Higgins and Chase both are out? Like, do you really want to continue to pass heavy? Yeah, you want to put the ball in your best player's hands in Joe Burrow. But if that means 30 targets for Tyler Boyd, Trent Irwin, and Josevich, is that the right move? I don't know. So I think there are a couple ways to play it here, right? You just super stack this game. It's like an NBA style underpricing for the rest of the team with the studs out. But if you don't want to go that way and you want to, because it's going to be popular, there's no doubt about it that it's going to be popular. I think a way you can play it, Moose, is play Joe Mixon, right? Mm-hmm. They run the ball more. Houston's defense still not great, and they're still 7-point favorites. We like playing favored running backs. Mixon as a pivot away from the Bengals' likely popular passing game, I think is another great GPP move.
Yeah, now Mixon's actually a lot more popular projected than I originally thought. Looking at the model here, projected for about 20%, 25% on both sites, 17 on FanDuel, 24 on DraftKings. Do you think that changes at all if more people gear towards the passing game of Cincinnati?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm looking now because he is only $6,200 because they refuse to change pricing. I guess what we might end up seeing is people just playing a ton of guys from that game. Yeah. And I'm wondering how industry optimizers will work here and sim tools and whatnot, and how many Bengals they're willing to play in a lineup. I will say our model or our builder defaults to max one player per team. This is certainly a situation where you can open that up to 2, maybe even 3 guys, 3 Bengals, especially in smaller GPPs, if you play Mixon and Boyd and one of the other receivers.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of, I don't want to say it's like a short slate, but like short slate in the fact that every other team sucks. Where, we have, sometimes you do your in these 100-player contests, 118-player contests on DraftKings, where you do a 3x1, 2x2. Like, I don't, like, both these offenses are so explosive and cheap.
Like,
I wasn't going to go there. There's no way I was going to say 4x2. But we've seen it happen in like regular weeks.
Yeah, we've seen it happen in regular weeks when teams haven't been as depleted, and we've seen that be a very popular move by some of the top NFL DFS players when going back and looking at lineup reviews. Just one comes to mind. There was a Chargers-Houston game maybe last year or the year before, and some of the winning lineups by a couple players were like 5-1, 5-2 stacks on a normal size week. So who's to say that we can't fit 4 underpriced Bengals and 1 or 2 Texans in the same lineup and you just play studs around it? It seems like honestly a very good approach.
Yeah, I'm just actually looking here. I'm trying to see. Yeah, I mean, the fact that there's so many people that you can play here. I just did a 4x2, and now I have enough lineup for Pollard and other studs, and that's part of the new meta stacks. Is now if you can have a cheap stack, you get to fit in studs around it. But yeah, so
meta to the next level by playing for them from one team. All jokes aside, it's a good strategy this week. If we get the chase news, let's monitor the chase news and get official word on that.
Absolutely, yes. So we talked our head off about the Cincinnati game. I'm just looking at my notes here. Just a handful of injuries. Nothing really. I don't think any noteworthy to say. There are some defensive injuries.
Houston's kind of depleted, right?
Yeah, on defense, cornerbacks out. They're out without Jimmy Ward as well. So big. I think decent bump to the passing game as well. So I wonder how they play that if Houston's secondary is depleted. Do they still pass it to Irwin and Boyd and all that?
I mean, you would think so, right? Like, okay, maybe we don't want to truly rely on Irwin and Boyd and Josevich, but we look at across the field and we see them starting 2 backups in 4 of their secondary spots. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe they continue to do that. Another bump for Mixon. Houston starting nose tackles outside Ridgeway. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're really banged up on defense. They've done a great job through 9 weeks of navigating some of these injuries, but a lot of times it just piles up too much. And Moose, I mean, Burrow healthier and healthier. I think this is certainly a spot where it could just explode. And ownership is going to follow, so we have to think of creative ways to play it without making our lineup too chalky in high-risk contests.
Yeah, that's when you play Morgan Stanley and help out your 401k there.
Yeah.
But
the 401k stack of the week.
Yes, the 401k. But yeah, so enough about the Bengals. We'll go to your next stack, Brian. But for those who are watching, if you like what you see, definitely go ahead and hit that thumbs up. If you have any questions as well, go ahead and type them in the chat, or you want to say hello, all that good stuff. If you don't, all good as well. If you just want to listen in, perfectly fine. But Brian, I'll let you talk about your next stack.
Yeah, the next one that's in a clear tier for me too is Seattle and Washington. And while generally we're not looking to stack underdog quarterbacks when they're an underdog by 7 or more points, a touchdown or more, I think Sam Howell is one of the exceptions. Teams in that mold are the exception, where they're passing like 1 billion times per game, right? There was a few weeks ago where they passed 55 straight times, not an exaggeration. So you can include both sides here. DK Metcalf, underperforming wide receiver. And I think Washington and Jack Del Rio haven't shown a very clear ability to change on defense, change their game plan. They continue to run one-on-one single coverage with their rookie corner against A.J. Brown, and he torched him for like 300 yards in 2 games.
Yeah.
DK Metcalf's, to me, I think most people agree, in the same mold physically as A.J. Brown. I don't see what would compel Washington to do anything differently here. And Metcalf is one of the best plays on the board. So why not stack him with Geno? Obviously, there's Lockett there, Smith and Jigba. The running game is a little murky with Seattle. Charbonnet's been getting more work. Kenneth Walker, obviously explosive. But then they also are going to have Kenny McIntosh, who was the talk of camp, but then got hurt early or late in camp. And then DJ Dallas. So 4 guys, potentially. We know Pete Carroll loves rotating and playing random running backs. So I think it's a pass game only approach for Seattle, despite their 7-point favorite status. And Washington's side as well. I think it's a really good game to stack.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a lot of pieces. And Logan Thomas, looking at the tight end model, I'm trying to get as many tight ends in my lineup as possible. But as you don't know, like you're talking about it. Yeah, Logan Thomas actually does rank kind of high in the model. Only 3,800, projected for just a couple percentage points on both sites, 2 to 3%. 3,800 on DraftKings, 5,300 on FanDuel. Seems like a pretty cheap piece that you can maybe throw in there if you're doing multiple lineups. If you're 150 maxing, 20 maxing. Yep. With the stack there. Looking at the running backs, I don't really think you can play any Washington running backs. Like you said, they passed like 60 times or whatever it was. But then what do you think about, like, McLaurin's also popular? 10 to 11% on FanDuel, 17% on DraftKings, only 5,800. Could you go do the actual, the OG Curtis Samuel piece, Jahan Dotson? Is there anybody that you could, like, maybe swap to that for a cheap piece? Or
yeah, you could. I think so. I think it's possible. Yeah. I mean, there's enough cheap pieces outside of game stacks this week that we might not necessarily have to force a Curtis Samuel piece, especially on a 10-game slate. Normally, it's pretty tough. I think there's a rare 10-game slate where we don't have to force a Curtis Samuel piece in our stacks. But yeah, all these guys have been, because they're passing so much, all these guys are viable. So a lot of different ways you can play this stack.
Yeah, I like it. And again, we've been talking about this for a handful of weeks now. If there's a stack you like, or if a stack you think that we find gross, just try and build some stuff with it. See what it comes out with. If you're like, this stack is gross, and you build it, you're like, actually, it's not as terrible. I can at least follow this. Or if you're like, this stack sucks, and you try and build it, and you're like, this lineup still sucks, then don't build with it. Vice versa for good stacks as well. So many ways to go about it, and I don't really have any much else to say for that stack. Gobbler here in the chat says both Heineke and Murray rank some of the best quarterbacks in the model. Is that a sneaky game stack? And that's actually one of the next stack that I want to talk about, Brian. Is I've been on the Arizona train since like week 1 or week 2, stacking them as well. I like it. The only thing, well, a handful of things, is that we don't know what Arthur Smith is ever going to do with Atlanta. You never know. That's the tight end number 4 this week instead of tight end 3. And it also, but even then, like with Kyler Murray coming back, how is he going to play? Is that going to, very high rushing upside? Is this one of the things where we cap it at 2 by X something because of his rushing upside?
Yeah, it's a tough game stack, but I agree. It is in my next tier of games. So I'm with the model and with Gobbler. I like this game a lot. And the nice thing is for at least the Atlanta side, they're getting Drake London back. Mac Hollins is out. So maybe that funnels a little bit more towards Drake London. Arizona notoriously just an horrific rush defense. So I think probably one of the best ways to play it is Kyler plus McBride, Kyler plus Marquise Brown, Kyler plus Marquise Brown and Trey McBride. Running back with Algier. He's 4,700. The model is picking up on that as well. Bijan, if he gets more than 12 touches, obviously a great play, but that's a big if. But a lot of pieces here, most. And I think that the targets and the touches are funneled enough that McBride's number 1 tight end in the model. So the model is clearly picking up on this game as one to target. And if that cheap Bengals stack fails, I could see this one succeeding.
Yeah, I mean, if we get news that this Bengals stack is going to be like 40% owned, I think is a great pivot. So a lot of unknowns, which shows that their ownership is very low. But that's how you can get through some of these, like especially if you're talking like your millionaire makers, your play actions, these super huge large field contests where you can get a 1 to 5% stack, and if they can just go off, you're good. And they don't even have to really go off; just score. Your guy gets 15, 20 points. That works.
Just outscore the other stacks in that range. And Can't Beat the Bay is asking about Trent Irwin. I assume you just tuned in. Can't Beat the Bay. We actually talked probably too much, but pretty extensively about the Cincinnati wide receiver situation. Once we're done, or if you want to scroll back now, scroll back a few minutes towards the beginning of the show, and we covered that game in detail. And just to answer your question, we do like Trent Irwin. It's not crazy, and it may end up being one of the most popular receivers on the slate if Chase is indeed out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we talked about how they brought up multiple wide receivers off the practice squad instead of the usual 1, but yeah. Cool. So that was kind of my little stack there, and we're here for about 30 minutes, so about 5 more minutes or so. Brian, I think we got time for one more stack.
All right, I'll go with Tampa Bay and Tennessee, which this is where we get the ultra meta stacks in. But to me, we got some injuries that are kind of interesting, especially on the defensive side. So Tennessee is missing Sean Murphy-Bunting. Would have been a revenge game for him. Unfortunately, he's out. But that obviously is a boost to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. They're on the outside for Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay's top 2 corners are extremely questionable. It seems like Carlton Davis is going to play, but he got just in one limited practice on Friday. And then Jamel Dean is in the concussion protocol, so their top 2 corners would be out. That would be great for DeAndre Hopkins and Will Levis. But Tennessee is without 2 offensive linemen, and this is Tennessee that we're talking about here. So it's not the best stack in the world. But I think a Mayfield Evans, Mayfield Godwin, maybe a 2-0, maybe a 2-1 type stack. I don't know if I'd fully stack this game. I don't think the secondary pieces can get there enough. Maybe on Tampa Bay side, right? Like you play Evans and Godwin with Mayfield. Yeah. But just another stack. You're playing a bunch of lineups to consider.
Absolutely. And as Double J says, will leave his season. So, yeah, he's thrown for 3 touchdown passes before, so can always happen again. And Life's MVP says, what do you think about Rondale Moore at 3K instead of Irwin? I think it's a great pivot if you're stacking that game. Absolutely.
Definitely. And I wish he was getting more volume for sure. But note that Atlanta's slot corner is out, which is where Rondale Moore runs a lot of his routes. So if you think they can take advantage of that, you think that offense, their ceiling and his target share can be raised with the addition, the return of Kyler Murray, then I say go for it.
Absolutely. Cool. So those are some of the stacks. Brian, was there any other ones that you mentioned at all? I think I had it jotted down that San Francisco and Jacksonville. Debo. Biggest thing is Debo Samuel returns. We know what they can do. Just before I spent 20 minutes and go over the show. But yeah, that's like the only other stack that I had marked down as one potential play.
I had Green Bay and Pittsburgh too. A couple injuries on both sides of the ball there in the secondaries, and then we get the double underperforming wide receiver stack with Christian Watson and George Pickens. So I think that makes some sense as well. But again, this is diving deep. There's a very clear tier this week in which games you want to target.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question here from McVibes. The vibes are good. He says, trying 150 max for the first time. Any advice on how to approach, or just do whatever I want?
You can certainly do whatever you want, but if you want to win, we actually, in our free strategy guide, OccupyFantasy.com, our NFL strategy guide, we actually have an entire section on how to 150 max, how to mass multi-enter with player pool sizing, stack types, how to play it in general. So if you want a template, and again, you can deviate from that template based on your play style, your experience, your vibes, whatever you want. But we can at least give you a guideline of how we generally like to start our 150 max process. So, Moose, can you throw it in the chat by any chance?
Yes, I will go ahead and throw that in now. There you go. Yep. So everyone, go ahead and check that free strategy guide out there. Works.
Yeah, just you just scroll down because it has a lot of stuff about NFL DFS in general. But if you scroll down towards the bottom, there is a specific 150 max multi-enter section.
Yep. Exactly. And now, Brian, the most important part of the show is we still haven't got a sponsor. So any fast food restaurants out there, if you want to sponsor us for the 5 minutes a week of show, our DMs and emails are open. So this is the generic fast food play of the week. What does that mean? It means that we are taking a wide receiver that is 5K or less on DraftKings and less than 10% owned. So cheap, low owned piece. And who's going to score? Touchdown. So pulling that up, I think Trent Irwin is not going to matter because if Chase is out,
he's going to be more than 1%. Yeah.
He's going to be more than 1%. So doing that, we get a handful, about 20 or so people. I'm curious, Brian, is there anybody in this list that stands out for you?
I'm going to take the easy approach, and I'll let you get the tough one. Christian Watson is $4,900 on DraftKings. He is $5,700 on FanDuel. He was technically an underperforming wide receiver last week, but missed the list because of their bye week in a previous in the previous stretch. He is officially an underperforming wide receiver now. Pittsburgh is missing Minkah Fitzpatrick. That certainly hurts their defense. Top of the model by a wide margin. And I think he's, if not top 3 in our FanDuel model, despite being only 5,700, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And we get him under 5%. So I'm going to take Christian Watson as my easy generic fast food play of the week. And to your point, we actually haven't tried very hard to secure a sponsorship. We've mostly been playing the let them come to us game, which hasn't worked so far. So maybe we got to reach out to some fast food companies.
Absolutely. I could say Michael Thomas, but I don't know if he's still in jail or not. I think he's playing. But
He's playing. Yeah.
That'd be the greatest revenge game ever. But no, I'm not going to go that. I'm actually going to go talking here about the Commanders. Jahan Dotson, 6% projected on DraftKings, 7% on FanDuel, 5K on DraftKings, 6,200 on FanDuel. We talked about the Washington stack. I said pivot away from Scary Terry. It's past Halloween, so he's not scary anymore. And we're going with Jahan Dotson.
I like it most, and just a professional transition there.
Absolutely. Let's see. We got some last couple chats, and then we'll get up out of here. McVibes says winning would be the greatest of vibes. I definitely agree with that. Hawk Dark says thoughts on John Robinson and McBride's secondary stack for a DraftKings single entry.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe you don't have to fully stack that game, but there are enough pieces that look nice. And maybe it's Algier. I know a lot of our followers and viewers and subscribers really have been in love with playing Bijan Robinson, and I get it because of the talent. He hasn't really been a recommendation of ours for the past 8 weeks. Really, the model hasn't really liked him, but I get it. If there's going to be a week where he blows up, it is this week. But just do not be devastated when Algier rushes for 2 touchdowns.
Absolutely. And Sean says, do you like super stacking this week? Yeah, we talked about super stacking a little bit with the Bengals game, especially in smaller field contests. I think you can do it that way if Chase is out with all the small pieces. I don't see many other teams for super stacking this week.
No, let me see here. Yeah, the Chargers game is too expensive. Cincinnati, Houston, by far the best super stacking game this week, and one that we do, in fact, recommend. Maybe Atlanta, Arizona. just because there are enough pieces there. But yeah, I think Cincinnati Houston's the one that you're gonna look at there if you're considering that strategy.
Yep. And Sean with the other fast food type play says, what one player who nukes the slate this week who isn't chalk, and one chalk that you're fading?
Yeah, I still think it's Christian Watson at 2%, underperforming wide receiver. That is easily my answer for who nukes the slate. As far as a chalkier player that we're willing to fade, I'm just looking here.
I think it's actually pretty easy for that, right?
Real quick, is it Bijan? Is
No.
it Bijan? Who you gonna
No.
say?
I mean, if you go in the running back model and sort by DraftKings ownership, the fact that Joe Mixon is the most popular, the chalkiest running back projected on DraftKings,
True. Yeah.
we see that he can put up goose eggs pretty quick if Cincinnati just goes out all passing like they do. So and I'm usually pretty lower exposed on Joe Mixon. I think that's my play for who I'd probably fade as the most chalk.
Well, what about Pollard too? I know we're all waiting for this Pollard regression to hit. It hasn't hit. Obviously, if there's going to be a game that it does, it's when they're 18-point favorites. But I could see some if all their scoring comes through the air, they rest their stars midway through the third quarter, or it's somehow more competitive than people expect, than betting markets expect. I think Pollard's another answer. I think these guys who just haven't been performing at running back, Pollard and Bijan, make the most sense.
Yeah. And then last question before I take us out of here. Can't Beat the Bay says, who do you have for the best cheap defense? I'm tempted to take the Jags against my Niners. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we have the Jags as top 5 in our model.
Yeah.
So the best cheap defense under $2,500 according to our model at OccupyFantasy.com. Right above them are the Cardinals at $2,500, but they are projected to be 17% owned. So to your point, Can't Beat the Bay. Maybe the Bay can be beaten, and you pivot with the Jags defense, who we have for half the ownership. If you're looking for an actual super low owned play, then there really isn't one. Like, it's the Giants next. So I would say Jags and then Arizona as far as cheap defenses to look at.
Yeah, pretty much there. So that's the end of our show. Again, if you like what you saw, definitely go ahead and hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and so you can get notified of any new videos or new live streams that we do. Our NBA guys are doing one every single day, even on NFL Sundays. We also have our Occupy Fantasy Discord. OccupyFantasy.com/Discord is where you can find out information on how to join. Our NBA guys are also doing live Q&As after the Q&A, strictly for our Discord members. We also have Chris doing right before on Sunday morning in our Discord, talking to our members about NFL as well. Got a bunch of stuff. MMA starts in, I think, hour and a half or so. We got
Live stream starts in 30 minutes.
Yeah, live stream starts in 30 minutes. We got a bunch of stuff for that going on. Yeah, so a bunch of stuff going on. Go ahead and check it out. If you have any questions, you know how to find us. Any last things, Brian?
No, I think you handled all the housekeeping. So subscribe, like, and if you want the extra edge, we know a lot of people, I say this in all the videos, we know a lot of people just watch our videos for free here on YouTube. That's why we do them, to help as many people as we can. But if you're the type of person who isn't signed up yet and you want that extra edge, you want to know as much as you can about contests in the slate before you enter them, then make sure you check out our site, OccupyFantasy.com, where you can get all the tools that we've developed and that we use to make money playing DFS. So make sure you check that out.
Absolutely. But so until next time, Moose and Brian from Occupy Fantasy, have a good night.
Good luck.